Hilchas Tumas Meis Perek Shishi. Over here, mainly, the Rambam is going to speak about the din of Tumas Goylul. Now, we learned earlier that the Rambam mentioned already that there's a din of a kever sosum is metame kol shesvivov, which means if you have a mess, for example, and you have a building on top of this mess, and that building is closed from all sides, so that's called a kever sosum. And a kever sosum, if you touch that binyan from all the sides, or even if you're mile on it, so the din is that it's tummy. That's this din of a kever sosum. That's only when it's built. Then there's another metzias of a goyl v'deifik. So the Ram gave the example, a goyl v'deifik would be a case where you have a mess lying, and on the sides of the mess, you put kalim or whatever you put on side of the mess, and on top of the mess, you also put something to cover. So the sides of the mess is called the deifik, and the top of the mess is called the goyl. That's the din. That's the din that the Rambam said earlier. Now here we're going to also learn that l'mashal, if you have a mess, a caver that's dug into the ground, and on top of the caver you put a cover, and that cover is still a portable cover. So that cover, which is on top of the caver, that's also called a goylul. That's a din goylul, and that tumah is also not on a menateiradika level. It's a tumah which is on a midri seifim. The Rambam said it's a tumah midri seifim. There's a tumah that's called tumas goylul. So again, there's a tumah which is an oil sauce, so that's on a deraisadika level, and there's a din of a tumas goylul which is on a derabon midri seifim. Now we just another point which we mentioned, I believe, is that a kever sosum doesn't mean the kever that's in the ground as we understand the kever, which means you dig a grave. Because over there, if that din would be a kever sosum, is metame kol svivov, so the entire world would have a din of a kever sosum, because in the world is a kever. A kever sosum means something that's built on top of the ground. It's not something that's part of the ground. Something that's built on top of the ground, that's called a kever sosum. And that's metame kol svivov, b'mago or b'oil. If a person touches the kever from the outside or is mile on it, so he's tummy. That's this din. And then there's another, that's a din on minateiradika level, and then there's on midivri seifrim that a goylul is metame. So we have a goylul where the mess is taka outside, and it's not really buried. It's just that it's outside and it's covered with this goylul and the doifik. The goylul on top and the doifik are the two things that are holding the doifik. And then you can have, there's the two sides which are holding the goylul rather. The doifik, the two sides are holding the goylul. And then you can have a messias if you actually have a kever, you dug a kever in the earth, and then on top of the kever you put something to cover the kever. And that covering is also called a goylul. That's called a goylul. That's number one. Now here the Rambam is going to be speaking about, the nukud of the din is that a goylul is matame. But it's not because the goylul itself was makabit tuba. It's while the goylul is acting as a goylul, so then the goylul is matame. So mainly you can have things that are be'etzim b'chlal not mekabel tumah. Things that are b'chlal not mekabel tumah, and they are acting as a goylul. So l'chura how could they be tummy? L'chura they're in ganzen not mekabel tumah. The answer is they're not their tummy. Pshat is that the goylul is transmitting the tumah while the goylul is acting as a goylul. And einachinami when it stops acting as a goylul, so the goylul is no longer tummy. It doesn't even have a din of something that touched tumah. It's something which b'chlal, it could be a mitzias of something that's b'chlal not mekabel tumah. And even while it's a goylul, it's not that it is tummy, it's transmitting tummy. That's l'chura, the nekuda of this perek. Perek shishi. Atzmeis hadog v'oirei, the skin of a fish, or the bones of a fish, is oisim hem kelim einam metabim tumah klal. There's no tumah that could be that's made out of something that's made out of a fish. Not the skin of the fish, not the bones of the fish. Lei medivri teirav, lei medivri sefer. V'chein, Yureka shalpnei amayim ukiyetziba. There's the greenery that grows on the water. It's called moss. So also, if you make something out of it, it's not tummy. Shekol ma shebiyam tor. Anything that's created in the yam is all tor. K'meshi yizbor b'hilchas kelim lefichach. Ha'esa oil me'eradag. If you're going to make an oil from the eradag, so even though you said before that the oil from oil is metame, or an oil that's made out of cloth is also metame. No, something that's cloth woven, oil me'eradag, a mitzamer shegadol b'yam, or from the mitzamer which grows in the yam, so they are not mekabel tumah. Is ein atzmi shel eil zeh mekabel tumah. Afal b'shemevis hatumah l'chol hashiyatata b'sharei holu. Whereas there's two dinim over here. We learned before. There's a din that the oil causes that everything that's under the oil should become tummy. That does make a difference if the oil is mekabel tumah or not mekabel tumah. And then there's another din that sometimes an oil is makabel tuma, and something that's made out of a woven material, and something that's made out of leather. All these things are makabel tuma. So here the Rambam is saying, yeah, they're all things that are woven are makabel tuma, and things that are leather are makabel tuma. But lepel, anything that's made out of the skin of a fish or the bones of a fish cannot be makabel tuma. And if it's acting as an oil, also it's not makabel tuma as an oil. It only transmits the tuma. It knows. It causes it that under the oil everything should become tummy. That's benigay atzmus hadok. Then there's the din of clay glolim, a keli that's made out of golol. Golol is dung, is waste. Uklei avonim, excrement. Uklei avonim, or something that's made out of stone. Or klei adam, or something that's made out of earth. But it's not talking about a kli cheres, which went into a kivshon, but it's just a klei adam, a packed earth. Is all these three things: klei glolim, klei avonim, klei adam, eina mekabim tuma. That's another thing that's not makabel tumas. So we spoke about atzmus adog and eirei. Now we spoke about klei glonim, klei avonim, and klei adom. V'chein, another din. Kli eitz ha'asu lenachas. If you have a kli eitz, so kli eitz could be makabel tuma. But if the kli eitz is made in such a way that it's not going to be moved. A kli eitz, we learn out from the psukim that it has to be dema l'sak, that it's metaltal, moli v'rekin, something which you could move. You could go around and move it. Mashenkin, if you have a large klietz, kegoin hateva, a large box of amigdals, like an armoire, or a hakaver, something circular, like a circular type of a big barrel, shehein magzikin arboim so balach, which they contain arboim so, which is the share of a mikveh. There's the amma lama, Allah amma barum gimel amas. That's the share of arboim so. So it could contain arboim so of liquid, and those Yavish, you could have also the pile on top of it. So it could be more than Arboim So, but Arboim So Balach, and V'yelem Sholayim, they should have a bottom, which means they could stay in the one place. They don't roll. They stay in the one place. So that's why we say it's a Kli'etz. Ha'asu L'nachas is Einom Mekablim Tu Meklal. So a Kli'etz Ha'asu L'nachas is not Mekabel Tu Meklal. Again, Leima Divri Teira, V'leima Divri Seifrim, V'elohein HaNikroim, Kli'etz Abba B'midah. That's a Kli'etz Abba B'midah, which the Ram mentions many times. Kli'etz above mida means a large kli'etz, which could be magzik arboim so belach, and it has shulayim, and it's made to stand in one place, and it's not makabel tumah. And then we're learning another din about kli'etz, halacha gimel, kli'etz, pshuteim teirim. If you have a kli'etz that doesn't have a klei kibul, is also it's tehirim, and mekableim tmeim. Only if it's a kli'etz is a mekabel, it could be tumah. So in other words, if you have a kli'etz that's a knife, so it's not a makabel. So even though it's a keli, it's tummy. You know, it would be a metal keli, and it would be a knife. It would be tummy because it's a keli. Masha'inkin a kli'etz. If it's not a makabel, it's not tummy. That's din b'negei kli'etz. And then we say klicheres. Also pshuteim tehirim. The pshuteim a pashut of a klicheres. A klicheres that doesn't have a makabel is toir, and only mikableim tumeim. And only if it has a makabel, if it has an inside, something to contain something, only then is the klicheres metame. And by klicher, there's another t'nai, ve'inam t'meim, elam avira. The tumah that it's makabel from its klikibul is only if it went into, in other words, if the tumah went into the aver. Or another option would be beheset hazov. If the zov moves the klicheres, so the mela, since when anything that's tummy touches a klicheres, it doesn't become tummy. Masha'inkin zov, the chiddush of a zov is that the tummy moves it and it becomes tummy. That's the only tumah. The Zav v'chaverev, where there's a musa called Tumas Hesed. There's a Hesed and Noise is not the same thing b'chlal. In other words, Tumas Masa is the taich, a person goes ahead and carries the dover tummy. That's Tumas Masa. Over here we're talking about fakert. The tummy moves the item that even could be a keli. He moves the item, which that item is being moved by the tummy. So that's a chiddush of a Zav, that is Matami b'Tumas Hesed. So when he moves the klicheres, he's also moving the inside of the klicheres. The klicheres is only mekabel tumah ma'avirei, and it's only mekabel tumah from the inside. From the outside, it's not mekabel tumah. But when you're moving the klicheres, so then you're moving also the inside. So you're moving the entire klicheres, so the entire klicheres becomes tumah. Nachamo. Klicheres pshuteim tehirim. In other words, the klicheres that has no klei kibul is toir, or mekableim tmeim, and only if it has a mekabel, only then is a tumah. But lepel, which is like as klietz in that manner. But by klicheres there's another chiddush. They know tmeim elam avirim. A klicheres you could touch the outside also become tummy as long as the klietz has a makabel. But a klicheres is only mitumeim elam aviram, a beheset hazov, or if the zov moves the klicheres. Afilu noga klicheres b'mes migabe. If you touched the klicheres from the outside of the klicheres with a mess, is ene mistami. However, v'im nichnas atumim and atumis ba'avirei, if the tumah went into the aver of the klicheres, the airspace inside the kibble of the klicheres, is aval b'shalei noga, but even if he didn't touch it, is nitma. Now, hoya klicheres in a mess ba'oil, if the klicheres was with the mess in an oil, so is nitma. Why? Shari hatumah nichnas ba'avirei, because that's the gather. The gather of an oil means that the tumah spreads in the entire oil. So since the klicheres has a kibble, so the tumah of the oil goes into the keli of the klicheres. However, if it was covered with a covering, and that covering was tightly covered, it was summit puzzle, it was covered tightly, is who mashabatechi tor. Then the klicheres is tor, and anything that's in the klicheres is tor. Commission is parish b'teira. The Torah says that clearly. Shein tumah niknus le'elami pischei. The tumah could only go from the Pesach, and if the Pesach is closed, and the Pesach is closed, so the tumah doesn't go in. That's only talking about a tumah like Tumas Meis, so it doesn't go in through the Pesach. However, beheset hazov, so then it'll go in even if there is a tzomit puzzle. A tzomit puzzle won't help heset hazov. Shareihu kimishinaga bekuli. That's what I'm saying. When the zov moves it, so it's as if he's touching the inside. So the fact that it has a tzomit puzzle is not going to help. So the Rambam gave us a list of things that aren't mekabel tumah. There's a atzmit, which those things are really negeh to hilchas kelim. But the Rambam is saying is al tzagdama that even though these things aren't mekabel tumah, but nevertheless they could be tamei. They can be mekabel tumah, mashal tumas el. They can become an oil tamei, like the Rambam started off in halacha aleph. But on the other end, as the Rambam will say in halacha daled, they could become a goylul. If they're a goylul, they could still transmit tamei. It's nachamah. So the Rambam spoke about the atzmus hadog. Anything that comes from the yam is not mekabel tumah. He spoke about kli glolim, kli avonim, kli adom is not mekabel tumah. He spoke about a kli eitz osi l'nachas, which is mekabel arboim son balach, and it's osi l'nachas. It has shulayim. It's not mekabel tumah. He spoke about a kli eitz, which doesn't have a kli kibul. It's a kli eitz pshuteim. It's called pshute kli eitz. It doesn't have a kli kibul. And al derazeh he spoke about a kli cheres, which doesn't have a kli kibul. So mainly all these things can't be mekabel tumah. They can't be mekabel tumah. Kli cheres can only be mekabel tumah me'avire. Halacha dalet. Now ha'isik goylul midavar she'eni mekabel tumah. You go ahead and you make a goylul from a davar she'eni mekabel tumah. We learned that a goylul is metame, midivri sefer. Is a isik goylul midavar she'eni mekabel tumah. Kigain shehiniach al gabi hakever even. Here we're talking about a goylul again. Before in halacha. Pedig Beis Rambam spoke about a goylul. He wasn't about a kever. Speaking about that there's two things on the side, and on top you put a goylul. But over here the same thing would be a kever. You have a kever, which is a kever that was dug into the ground, and on top of this kever you're putting something which is a goylul, which means a covering. Kiniach al gabi a kever even. You put a stone on top of the kever. A kli adomu, or a kli adomu, which he said before, an even is not mekabel tumah, or a kli adom is not mekabel tumah, or a kli eitz abo mida you put on top of the kever, a kli cheres hamukav tzomit pasul, which is also not mekabel tumah, or eir hadag, or you put on top of the kever something which is made out of the eir hadag, something that the skin of the fish, or va'atzmei ukiyetze be'elu, any things that are not mekabel tumah. So is a hanigeh behem tomit tumashu. Even though the items itself is takenam mekabel tumah, but if you touch this gelul, you're tomit tumashu, mishum negeh begelul. The imparsh, that's din number one. So the din number one is that a goylul can transmit tumah, even though the goylul itself is not really mekabel tumah, but nevertheless, while it's acting as a goylul, it could transmit tumah. The impir shemali is goylul. If it stopped being a goylul, which means you took it away from being the covering of the kever, either you moved the goylul from the kever, or you took the mess out of the kever, you took the mess out of that area where it was being a goylul on. Is arehing terim, so this goylul remains tar. The goylul is not mekabel tumah. So since it's not mekabel tumah, so it's tar. It was only being transmitting tumah while it was acting as a goylul. V'chein behema shekofsa v'aseis a goylul. So in order for a behema to have a din of a goylul, it has to be kofsa, because if it can move, it doesn't have a din of a goylul. Now we learned earlier that a behema can be mekabel tumah. There's no musik of a davar chai being mekabel tumah. Only an adam and a yid. Only a yid can be makabel tuma. So now you have a behema shekafsa, you tied it up. V'asa esa goel. So it's again hanigeh ba tamid to mashiva. Someone that touches this behema, which is acting as a goel, is tamid to mashiva. Calls manshi goel as long as the behema is still a goel. Now hitter behema, you untie the behema, it's already teir kishara behemas. V'chein now is nachadin chavis shimalei mashkin. You have a chavis which made a kli cheres, which is full of mashkin. Umukef is summit puzzle and it has a summit puzzle over it. So memele this kli cheres is not in a masa which is makabel tumah. So memele if this kli cheres would be in an oil ames, so the kli cheres would be tor and the mashke inside the kli cheres is tor. Now va'asa oisa gel lames, you took this kli cheres which had a muk of summit puzzle on it and you used it as a goel. So the din is hanegeh ba tami to mashiva. If someone touches this kli cheres which is muk of summit puzzle and has mashke inside, he'll be tami to mashiva. The so once it no longer is a goel, so then the chavis and the mashka is tor. The chavis and the mashka remain tor. It was always tor. Even while it was a goel, be'em is the chavis and the mashka were tor. It was just transmitting the tumah of the mess. Halacha hey. Now we're talking about now we learned a goel. Now a goel means it's something which is covering the mess. Now what happens if you have something which is covering the mess, but it has much more to it than it? Because it has much more to it. So you have, let's say, a beam. You have a beam, where the beam is a long beam, and you're using the beam to cover the mess. So over here, you're not really, the whole beam is not really being used to cover the mess. Only the part of the beam that's, now it depends how the beam is set up. If the beam was put on top of the caver, vertically, so knows it's going upwards. So the question is, how high up is this koira still considered a goel? How much of this koira is called a goel? And then if it's put horizontally, so again, you have to know how far is it considered a goel. Yeah, that's this halacha. Halacha hey, koira shena asa goelu lekever. You went ahead and you took a beam and you made it for a goelu lekever. Bein imed is bein muta al sida, whether it's standing vertically or it's muta al sida, it's horizontally, is ein tamei ela keneged pesach hakever b'levad. The only part of the koira that's tamei is the part that's connected Pesach HaKever. The rest of the Keira is not really acting as a goel. It's connected to a goel, but it's not acting as a goel. And therefore, if you touch the part that's outside the kever, it's tor. Us tor. Now us, that's the number one. Now us a roisha goel lekever. So the over here is talking about that it's vertically. That's what it means. Us a roisha goel lekever. Variya medis ala kever k'meila, which is what he said before as well. Before he was speaking about bein medis, bein mutal sida, which is l'chura part of this din of a medis ala kever. I'm not sure what's the difference between what he said before, but I'll call upon him. If he usher reisha goel lekever, he knows he put the beam on top of the kever vertically. Variya medis ala kever k'meila. So it's as hanigeh mimena bar bo tvachim samuch lekever. If a person touches the bottom 4 tvachim, which is near the kever, so even though the beam may be a long beam, but the bottom 4 tvachim, which is near the kever, that's Tami Mishum Gel. That has a din of Tami Mishum Gel. However, Mi'arbo L'mayla, if someone touches above the 4 tvachim, which is on the kever, so then it's tor. That by Medvar Mamuna, we're saying that when it's above 4 tvachim, it's tor, is only Bizman Shuasid Lakotzeis. If he has intent of cutting it, so then we say that only the bottom 4 tvachim are Tomei, and the top 4 tvachim are tor. But if his intent is to remain, that it should remain as is, so and it has no intention of cutting it down, so then it's kula gel, then it's kula gel. So vice tois, even though he's intending on cutting it, but lepel, the bottom 4 tvachim is tummy, regardless if he's intending on cutting it or not. No, since lepel, it's there, so memela knows, much if he would have a girl chatchila made out of 2 tvachim. So then, and he has intention of taking off 1 tefach. That doesn't make it always girl. Lapel right now is acting as a girl. So the bottom 4 tvachim is acting as a girl. Anything above 4 tvachim, so if you have an intention of taking it off, so it doesn't become bottled to the girl, it's a separate entity, and therefore it's not bottled to the girl, and it doesn't transmit tumah. Mashiach, if you intend on taking it off, so your intent of taking it off makes it that it shouldn't have a din of a girl. And Mamela, if you touch that part which is above 4 tvachim, you're not done. That's the pastures of Lashon Aram. Halacha Vov. Shtei avonim g'deila shel arbo tvachim she'osim gel. So you have over there, let's say, a kever, and on top of the kever you put a cover, and that cover is not one piece. It's made out of 2 stones, and each stone is 4 by 4 tvachim. Shtei avonim gedela shel arba'at bar tvachim she'osim geilu. Is hamayil al gabi shteim tami. If you're mile on either one, in other words, each one is called a geilu. Since they're both covering the kever, so each one is called a geilu. Since it's called a geilu, so either one. Shteim doesn't mean both of them together. It means either one. Hamayil al gabi shteim, on either one is tami. Now nitla achas mem. Now you took away one of them, so you have a stone over the kever, but the stone is not covered the entire kever. There's another whole area where the other stone was standing, and now that stone is no longer covering the kever. Or l'chatchila wasn't covering kever. The pashto is not negate that it was nitla. Whereas you have a stone that's only covering half of the kever. So the din is hamayil al gabi shniya. If a person is mile on the stone that's still there, is tor mipnei sheyesh l'tumah derech shetetzebei. So in other words, since the gather of a girdle is that it's covering, it's like a shtickle kever sosum. There's a kever sosum. It's like a din of a shtickle kever sosum. It's not a kever sosum on a minatera dika level, because we're not dealing with a real kever sosum, because we're saying it's built into the ground. It's not really a kever sosum. Masha'inkin, the midivri seifman has a din of a kever sosum. So in order to have a din of a kever sosum, it has to completely cover the mess. Masha'inkin, if there's a dalad al dalad where it's not covering the mess, so then there's a place for the tumul lotzes. So therefore, the other stone doesn't have a din of a goyl. Obviously, if you'd be mile over the part that doesn't have a stone, so you're being mile al mess. So then for sure you'd be tummy. That's the chura this din. Let's read it again. Shtei avonim gedela shel arba tvachim she'osim geilu. So you have a goyl that's made out of two stones. They're both like a half a goyl. Is a mile al gabi shteim. While there's both stones there, so if you're mile on either of them, it's tummy because you're being mile on a goyl. However, nitla achas mem, one of these stones were taken away. Is a mile al gabi shniya. If you mile on the one that's left over, is stored. So therefore, it doesn't have any more a din of a geilu. Now halacha zayin gal shel tzreides she'asa geilu lekever. You put a pile of stones on top of the kever, which is also a geilu. Is ein tami el seder apnimi. You know, the part that's on top, the pile of the stones which are on top are not necessary for the geilu. It's just the inside row, which is actually covering the kever. That has a din of a geilu. Shehut tzarcha shel kever. That's the part. That's the need of the kever, in order to cover the kever. The other stones, which are heaping over the inside stones, they taka don't have a din of a gil. Halacha ches. Now we learned that in order for kever sosum to be matame, it has to be a kever sosum which is built above ground. If you have the kever, which is the ground itself, the ground itself is not matame, it's kever sosum. Now the goyl that's on top of the ground, that's covering the kever which was built in the ground, that goyl is matame. But the kever itself is not matame. Now that is if you have a cellar, which the cellar is already like part of the ground. The cellar is part of the ground. You have a mountain, and now you go ahead and dig a hole in the cellar. So similarly, like digging a hole in the ground. Just like you dig a hole in the ground is not tummy. So that is if you dig a hole in the cellar and you put the mess into the cellar, so the cellar becomes, so to speak, like the aron of the mess. So then the cellar doesn't become tummy. It doesn't have a din of a kever sosum. But if you use something to cover that hole that you made in the cellar from the top, so that covering is called a goyl, and the goyl is matami. Just like we had the goyl, which is on top of a kever, is matami. A goyl, which is on top of the aron, which you made in the cellar, has a din like an aron, like a goyl on a kever. That's the first halacha. Halacha ches. Aron shu chokuk b'cellar. You have an aron, which the aron is made by digging into the cellar, and that's how you have the aron. But the cellar is like part of the ground. V'iniach behames, and then you put the mess into the cellar, and v'chiso bagel, and then you cover it on top of the goyl. So the din is hanigeh b'cellar b'chol makom. Anywhere around this cellar where you touch is Torah, because even though it's l'chura a kever, but a kever sosum, or not a kever sosum, it's a kever, but I'll call upon him since it's part of the ground, so therefore it's Torah. That doesn't have a din of a kever sosum. And when ageh begel, but if you touch the gel, it's tummy. L'mazad dema lebear godel, which is moli mason. If you have a bear in the ground, mamish, and it's moli mason, v'evid del alpia, shein tummy, l'keneged chalol. Only on top is tummy, but the around and around is not tummy. That's the number one. Now, however, v'mbon and nefesh al gaba, if you build something on top of a kever that's in the ground, or a kever which is in a cellar, regardless, if in bon and nefesh al gaba you built like a structure on top of this kever, which is in the cellar or in the ground. So then is harezeh kekever sosum. So that structure which is on top of the ground, which you build the nefesh, you built like a little structure on top of it, has a din of a kever sosum, and then a mekabel mitamim kol svivov. So again, the kever itself, which is the ground, is not mitamim kol svivov because it's karkelim. Karkelim not mitamim kol svivov. In order for a kever sosum mitamim kol svivov, it could be only something that you built. You built as a kever sosum, so then it's mitamim kol svivov. That's the number one. You have an aron which is chokuk b'sela. Now a regular aron which is chokuk b'sela. Now hoya ha'aron ha'chokuk b'sela rechava mulmata v'tzara mulmayla. So here we're also adding that you have to talk about that the cellar is mamish sticking out of the, let's say, the mountain or sticking out of the ground. So therefore the cellar looks separated from the ground. Because it doesn't look like it's mamish part of karka elo. Over here we're talking about a cellar which is already like sticking out of the ground. There's hoya ha'aron ha'chokuk b'sela. It was rechava mulmata. On the bottom it was white, and v'tzara mulmayla, and on the top it was narrow. So you have like an opening. You have an opening on top to the cellar. On the bottom in the cellar you have a wide opening, and on top it's narrow. And v'hames b'teich, and the mess is in the cellar, which is wide on the bottom and narrow on the top. So hanigeh bo mulmata, if you touch the bottom of this cellar where the mess is, the side of the mess maybe is start. Because lepel again, it's a cellar, it's part of the ground, and it's not makabel tuma, and it's not. It doesn't have a din of a kever sosim, it doesn't have a din of a kever. It's part of the ground. However, umilmailon, if you touch the part of the cellar, which is really also part of the cellar, but that part of the cellar which is becoming narrower on top, so that part starts looking like a goyl, because a goyl means the covering of the mess. Over here, I mean, you have the cellar itself, which is the place where the mess was placed into. But since this mess, the cellar, is wide on the bottom and narrow on the top, so the opening is like a wide opening on the bottom, and on top it becomes narrower. So the part that's coming towards the top, it looks like a little bit part of the goyl. It looks like part of the goyl. So therefore, so the top is considered a goyl and also conveys to it. That's his din. It was wide on the bottom, and on the top it was narrow, and there was a mess inside this cellar. So the din is hanigeh ba milmaton tor. Anyone that touches this cellar milmaton is tor. Just like we said before, that if you touch the cellar, you're tor. However, milmayla tummy. If you touch the side of the cellar, which is already higher up, and that side is already hanging over the mess, that's tummy. Shariat stud the milmayla some chal gabi hames. Those sides which are milmayla, which are higher up, as we said, they're becoming narrower. They're like hanging over the mess. So therefore, they're somewhat similar to a goylul on a mess, and v'nasu kigel. Therefore, they become like a goyl. Now, hoysa aron rechava mulmayla v'tzara mulmata. It was fakert. On the top, it was wide, and the bottom was narrow. The top was wide, and the bottom was narrow. So then, over here, for sure, it looks like it was completely different, and that it's not doesn't look like it's really part of the ground. Before, it's not so clear that it's not part of the ground. In other words, when it's wide on the bottom and narrow on the top, but over here, if it's wide on the top and narrow on the bottom. So notice you're talking about a cellar which comes out down into a narrow area, and then obviously that narrow area is connected to the ground, or connected to a mountain. But I'll call upon him, since we have this triangular shape stone, which is Rechav Mulmaila, and it's Tzara Mulmata, so therefore it looks like a kever sosim, which is on top of the ground, and therefore on Negeba Mikol Mokum Tomi. Wherever you're going to touch it, it has a din like a kever sosim, and therefore wherever you're going to touch it, it has a din of Tumah. So we had the first case, which Aron Shul Chakuk B'Sela, and over there the cellar was under the ground. Then we have the next two cases where the cellar was already above ground, and you have a case where it's narrow on the bottom, and wide on the bottom and narrow on the top, and then you have wide on the top and narrow on the bottom. And now we have the third case, Hoysa Shava. It was straight. In other words, it wasn't narrow on the top and narrow on the bottom. It was regular straight. It was a rectangular or a square, Hoysa Shava. So then, Hanegeba mitefach hasomak lekarkeisa ulamayla tomei. So again, the whole thing is considered tomei because again we're talking about a cellar which is sticking out of the ground. So it looks like it's as if it's a structure above the ground, and therefore, so wherever you touch mitefach hasomak, you touch even the part that's under the mess. There's even the part that's under the mess that's sticking out of the ground. So as long as it's within a tefach, close to where the mess is. In other words, you have the cellar, and you have in the cellar you have a hole. Now, and then you have the part, like so to speak, the base of this cellar, which is also protruding from the ground. So now the part of that cellar, that base, which is close to the hollow part, within a tefa close to the hollow part, is also tummy if you touch the outside of it. Mashenkin, if you touch something further down, so then there's nothing to do with the mess anymore, and therefore you turn. So again, so then, and again, if it was straight, it's like a rectangle or a square, is anything you touch anything around this area where the mess is tummy, and even from under where the mess is, as long as it's within a tefach of where the mess is, you're also tummy. And the gerba mitefach hasamach lekarkisa ulamaila and upwards is tummy. However, mitefach ulamata, if you touch, the cellar, but you touch the area outside the cellar, which is already a tefach away from the hollow part of the cellar where the mess is, so then you tor. Mitefach ulamata tor. Now, all these dinim we're talking about when you're making the hole in the cellar on the top, and then you're placing the mess from the top, and it's lying in the cellar. What would be if nikav aron b'cellar? You made a hole on aron in the cellar. In other words, you made like a vault. You made a vault from the side, and when hichnas at mes b'teicha k'minager, you put the mess into this vault in the cellar, in the stone, like a nagar, like a bolt. In other words, you're putting it. It's not. In other words, you made the hole horizontally. In other words, there's a hole that's going horizontally, and then you push the mess into the hole into the cellar through that hole. Is an egeba mechol makom tor. Then it has a din of tara. Then it doesn't have a din of kever hames. However, chutz makom pischa, except for the makom pischa where you put something to cover that hole, so that's still also called a goyl. But the rest of the stone is not considered a makom where if you touch the outside of the stone, it's tummy. There's a lot of different deis and exactly the protim over here. The Ravid has very big arguments on this Rambam, the Tainus with the Tisefta, Pshat and Tisefta. But I'll go upon what we're learning over here is L'chura al derech haposhut, that there's different siyurim of how the aron is in the cellar. So we had the first case of aron shuchakik b'cellar, where the cellar is not protruding from the ground. Then we had three cases of the cellar protruding from the ground, and that was the case where it was Rachav Mulmata and Tsar Mulmaila, or Rachav Mulmaila and Tsar Mulmata, and then there was Shava from all sides. And now we have another case of Nikav Aron B'Sela. In other words, you make the hole on the side of the cellar, and that's how you put in the mess. So B'chiyai Gavna, the whole cellar doesn't have a din of Tumah. It's just that the part that you put to cover that hole, that has a din of a Goyl, and Memela it's Tumah. Halacha tes, Mo'ora Shakever B'Teicha. You have a cave, and the cave that has a caver inside. That's how they used to bury kvarim, like they would make vaults in the Meira, as we'll learn Behemshech, and that's how they would bury the mason. And the chotzer lefnei Meira, and it was going into the Meira. There was like an antechamber. There was a chotzer going into this Meira, outside the Meira. Now the question is the chotzer, the Meira which had the actual mess. Now, is this chutzner also underground, or this chutzner there's no covering over the chutzner? It could be in two-way fanim. In other words, you could have let's say you go down. Let's say you'll go down an area, and that area the chutzner is also under a roof, under the roof, or no, the chutzner is not under the roof. So that's what he's saying. Bisman shach chutzner la'aver. If the chutzner is really not under the roof, so then ha'imid b'teicha tar. If you're standing inside this chutzner, even though it's a chutzner which is going to go into a Meira which has mason, which has kvarim. Nevertheless, if you're standing in the Meira Torah, you shouldn't be touching the mashkav amora, just like we learned earlier, that if you put your hand to the mashkav of a house which has a mess, so your hand becomes an extension to that mashkav, so therefore you become tummy. So over here also, if you put your hand to the mashkav of this ma'ara, so this ma'ara filled with kvarim, so Memela that ma'ara is tummy. So Memela, so you should, if you put your hand there, you're also tummy. However, that's talking about if the chutzner doesn't have a covering. So therefore, Ba'atzim standing in the chutzner is not under Eil HaTumah, as long as you don't put your hand and connect it to the mashkav hamor. But if there's a covering over the chutzner, So it depends. Yes, sir. If between the covering on the chutzner, knows there's an empty space between the place where you're standing, which is under a roof, and the place where there's the ma'ara, which is obviously under a roof, and there's an area there which is dalid tzvachim, which doesn't have a roof. In other words, between the area where you're standing, which is under a roof, and the ma'ara, which is obviously under a roof, so there's an area which doesn't have a roof, which is 4 tvachim wide, 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. So then, on niklas l'sham tor, even though you're in the chutzner, but you're tor. However, if lepel that opening between the chutzner and the ma'ara, the place which doesn't have a roof, is less than 4 by 4, so afal pi shalei naga b'pesach tamei haniklas l'sham tamei. If you go in there, you're tamei. Afal pi shalei naga b'pesach hamara. Even though you didn't touch b'pesach hamara, the question is why exactly? Is it a din derabanan? The whole din is a din derabanan. But lepel, we're saying azay. The ma'ara is tummy. The chutzner, if it's open chutzner, so it's not tummy unless you put your hand next to the mashkef. If the ma'ara it has a roof over it, so this if the chutzner has a roof over it, so the question is this chutzner is like an extension to this ma'ara. The chutzner has a roof over it, so maybe it's an extension to the ma'ara. So if there's an opening, which is arba between the chutzner which has the roof and the ma'ara, there's an area which doesn't have a roof, so then we don't look at this chutzner as an extension of the ma'ara. And then standing in the chutzner, you're tor. If it's less than arba, so we look at this chutzner as being an extension of the ma'ara, and therefore you're tummy.